Liv was not breathing right, and I had a spoonful of charcoal paste halfway to her mouth when the door slammed open behind me. "Do not touch her," Lady Freya said, in a voice pitched to carry to every servant still awake in that wing. "You have poisoned that child already." I did not stop moving. Fen was screaming somewhere behind me, and Soren's wolf was already tearing down the corridor at a speed no king's composure should have been able to survive keeping up with, and I understood, with total clarity, that I had perhaps 30 seconds to prove what had actually happened before someone decided I did not deserve the chance to. I got the paste into her mouth exactly as Soren reached the doorway, and I did not know yet whether I had been fast enough, or whether the next thing to happen in that nursery was going to be a hanging. Let me tell you how I ended up kneeling over a dying child, with an entire household deciding whether I was her saviour or her murderer. It started 3 weeks earlier, on the day they carried the 5th nanny out of that nursery with bite marks on her wrist, swearing on every god she knew that Wintermoor's motherless heirs were simply unmanageable, and that no woman in her right mind would attempt a 6th. I was 22, a kitchen apprentice at Wintermoor Castle, with no ambitions beyond keeping the ovens fed and my head down, and I had absolutely no interest in the twin pups screaming somewhere above me in the East Tower. I had heard the stories the way everyone below the 4th floor had heard them, that the king's children, not yet 3 years old, had refused every single woman brought in to care for them since their mother died birthing them, screaming through the night for entire weeks at a stretch, driving away nannies with a ferocity that seemed almost too coordinated for children that young to manage on purpose. I only went up to that tower because the kitchens had run short of hands the night the 5th nanny fled, and someone needed to carry a supper tray up before the pups went hungry along with everyone else's nerves. I did not volunteer out of kindness. I volunteered because because our head cook was shouting for anyone with 2 working hands, and I happened to be standing closest to the tray. I found them in the nursery in near darkness, Fen hoarse from crying, Liv curled silent and rigid in the corner, in the particular stillness of a child who has cried until crying no longer helps. The room smelled of cold tea gone untouched, and the particular staleness of a space no one had properly aired in days, and I understood. Standing in that doorway, exactly why 5 nannies before me had walked out of it in tears of their own. I did not know the first thing about soothing pack children. I only knew what I would have wanted someone to do for me, which was simply to sit down on the floor, at their level, and not demand anything of them at all. I set the tray down and sat, and said nothing, and ate a piece of the bread myself, slowly, the way you eat in front of a hungry stray you are trying not to frighten off. It was Liv who moved first. She crossed the nursery in absolute silence, climbed into my lap without asking permission from anyone, and went still against my chest in a way the nursemaids downstairs would later describe to me, wide-eyed, as something they had not seen her do for a single soul since her mother died. Fen followed a moment later, more cautious, watching me the way his father would later watch strangers, assessing, careful, deciding. He did not climb into my lap. He simply sat close enough that his shoulder touched mine, and reached over, without a word, to take a piece of my bread. I stayed until they both fell asleep, which took the better part of an hour, and I did not think much of it beyond relief that the tower had finally gone quiet. I did not know, walking back down to the kitchens well past midnight, that I had just done the one thing 5 trained nannies before me had failed to do, and that the household above me had noticed every second of it. Soren found me in the kitchens the next morning, and I understood, the instant he stood in that doorway, exactly why an entire court fell silent whenever this man entered a room. "My children slept through the night," he said, without preamble, in a voice that had clearly not expected to be saying those words aloud. "For the first time since their mother died. Bronn tells me it is because of you." "I did not do anything, Your Grace," I said, wiping flour from my hands out of pure nervous habit. "I sat with them. I ate supper. 5 trained women could not manage that." Something moved behind his eyes, careful and unreadable. "I would ask you to try again tonight." I did not want to. I want to be honest about that, because it makes what came after considerably more true. I had a kitchen to run, and no experience with grieving pups, and no particular desire to become entangled in a household this fractured. But I thought of Liv's small, rigid stillness in that corner, and found I could not quite say no. I went back that night, and the night after, and within a week it had simply become understood, without anyone formally deciding it, that the kitchen girl went up to the East Tower each evening, and that the twins would not settle for anyone else. Those first days taught me more about the twins than any warning from the household staff ever had. Fen, I learned, did not scream out of temper the way the nannies had claimed. He screamed because no one had ever simply let him be angry about his mother, without trying to talk him out of the anger first. And once I stopped trying to soothe it away, and instead sat with him through it, the screaming shortened by degrees each night, until it stopped needing to happen at all. Liv, for her part, did not speak much in those early days, but she watched everything. The exact way I stirred porridge, the exact seam where I folded her blanket, the precise order I set her small collection of pebbles on the windowsill each evening, and I understood, watching her watch me, that she was building a picture of safety one repeated detail at a time. I taught them both to stir porridge with the same chipped wooden spoon I had carried up from the kitchens without thinking, mostly because it was the spoon already in my apron pocket. And Liv declared within the first week that the spoon now belonged to her specifically, and that no other spoon in the castle would be permitted near her bowl again. Fen, not to be outdone, decided the spoon belonged to both of them jointly, and the two of them argued about spoon custody with a fierceness that made me laugh out loud for the first time since I had started climbing those stairs. Bronn, Sorin's second, cornered me in the corridor on the 8th day, studying me with the particular careful expression of a man trying to work out whether I was a solution or a complication he had not yet fully priced. "The king has not smiled since his wife died," he said, without preamble. 3 days ago, I watched him smile at something his own daughter said to you at supper. "I do not know what you have done to this household, but I would ask you to be careful with it." "I am not trying to do anything to this household," I said. "I am trying to help 2 children sleep." "That may be true," Bronn said, "and it may still be the most dangerous thing that has happened in this castle in a year." I did not understand what he meant until Lady Freya found me herself, 3 days later, in a corridor she had clearly been waiting in. She was Isolde's sister, I had learned by then, the late Luna's own blood, installed in the castle since the birth to help manage the children's care. Though I had noticed, in my few weeks in that tower, that she visited the nursery considerably less often than her position implied she should. "You are overstepping," she said, without introduction, her voice pleasant in the particular way that makes a threat land harder than shouting would. "A kitchen girl does not raise a king's heirs. I would suggest you remember your place before someone reminds you of it less gently." "I am not raising anyone," I said. "I am sitting with 2 children who are frightened and grieving, which is more than I have seen anyone else in this castle do for them." Something in her face went very still, controlled in a way that unsettled me more than open anger would have. "Careful," she said again, softer this time, and left without another word. I did not understand yet exactly what I had threatened, simply by getting 2 children to sleep through the night. I would understand soon enough, and at considerably greater cost than a corridor warning. I mentioned the encounter to Bronn the following morning, mostly to have someone else's opinion on whether I had imagined the edge in Freya's voice, and watched his careful court manners slip for just a moment into something closer to worry. "Lady Freya has been present at every nanny's dismissal this past year," he said slowly, as though saying it aloud for the first time made him hear it differently. "I had assumed grief made her attentive to their care. I am beginning to wonder if I assumed wrong." "What would she gain," I asked, "from children remaining unsettled?" "I do not know yet," he admitted, "but I intend to find out before I decide I am wrong to worry." It was Sorin himself, on the 12th night, who finally told me why the tower had been screaming for a year before I ever carried a supper tray up its stairs. I found him in the nursery doorway after the twins had fallen asleep, watching them the way a man watches something he is afraid to want too openly. Isolde died 3 days after they were born, he said, quiet, not quite looking at me. A fever the healers could not break. I held her through the worst of it and could do nothing but watch. And I have spent every day since telling myself that if I had simply been faster, smarter, found the right healer sooner, she would still be here to do this instead of you. That is not a fair weight to carry, I said. I am aware it is not fair. I carry it regardless. He looked at the twins, asleep, tangled together the way they always were by morning. I have kept my distance from every nanny brought in for them, because some part of me believed that loving anyone new in this house was a betrayal of loving her. I did not expect a kitchen girl to walk through that belief without even trying to. I did not walk through anything on purpose, I said. I only sat down on the floor because I did not know what else to do. That, he said, is precisely why it worked. Everyone else tried to manage them. You simply stayed. I did not have an answer ready for that, so I said nothing. And we stood together a long moment in the doorway of a nursery that had, for the first time in a year, gone entirely quiet. Tell me about her, I said finally. Quiet, Isolde. Not the loss of her. Who she was. He looked surprised by the question. The way Bronn had looked surprised days earlier, when I asked something no one had thought to ask him either. She laughed too loudly for court occasions and never once cared that people noticed. She used to steal pastries from this very kitchen and blame the twins for it before they were even born, purely to see if the cooks would believe her. Something eased in his face, remembering rather than grieving for once. She would have liked you. She had very little patience for people who tried too hard to be liked, and considerably more for people who simply showed up and stayed. Then I hope I am doing her memory some credit, I said, rather than replacing it. You are not replacing anything, he said. I do not think it works that way. I think there is simply more room in a person than grief wants us to believe there is. I did not have an answer ready for that either, so I let the quiet nursery hold it instead, and something between us settled a little further into a shape neither of us had named yet. If you want to find out whether Lady Freya's warning turned into something considerably more dangerous than a corridor threat, and what Fen and Liv did the day the truth about her finally reached that hall, stay with me through to the end of this. Follow along so you do not lose the thread of what happens when two motherless children choose a mother before the adults around them have finished arguing about whether they should be allowed to. I stayed at Wintermoor considerably longer than either Soren or I said aloud that it meant anything. Weeks folded into each other. The twins grew steadier by the day, Liv finding her voice again in small, careful sentences, Fen losing the wary watchfulness that had coloured every interaction he had with adults since his mother's death. I taught them both to stir porridge with the same chipped wooden spoon I had used since I was younger than they were now, and Liv declared, with total 3-year-old authority, that the spoon was now hers, and no other spoon in the castle would do. It was Bronn, going through the household accounts on a dull afternoon, who found the pattern that finally explained everything. Each of the 5 nannies dismissed before me, it turned out, had received a quiet payment from Lady Freya's own private purse within days of leaving. Severance, on paper, though none of them had actually been dismissed by the King's office at all. Bronn dug further, at my urging, and found the true shape of it, an old Wintermoor Regency law rarely invoked, that granted a deceased Luna's closest blood relative legal guardianship of motherless heirs if the king had not remarried or secured stable, consistent care for them within 1 year of the mother's death. That year would end in 11 days. Freya had not been trying to help raise her sister's children. She had been quietly making certain no one else could, so that when the deadline arrived, she could stand before the pack elders and prove, with 5 failed nannies as evidence, that Soren was incapable of providing his own children stable care, and take them from him entirely. Under a law, no one had thought to question in a generation. I sat with that ledger a long time, understanding, with the particular cold clarity of a fact rearranging everything around it, that every scream that had driven 5 women from that tower had not been the twins' grief alone. It had been engineered, patiently, by the one woman the household trusted to be grieving right alongside them. Something in me that had been simply quietly caring for 2 children stopped being simple. I took the ledger to Soren myself that same evening. His face, reading it, went colder than I had yet seen it. "She has used my wife's death as a weapon against my wife's own children," he said, "for an entire year, in my own house. And I did not see it." "You were grieving," I said. "She counted on exactly that. Then I am done letting grief make me blind to what is standing in my own hallways." He set the ledger down, his jaw set in a way that told me the grieving king I had met 3 weeks earlier had just decided to stop only grieving. 11 days. She will not wait quietly for them to pass. He was right. Freya moved first, and moved fast. The moment she realized the ledger existed at all, she went before the household steward within 2 days, formally reporting me for what she called reckless overstepping of my station. Feeding the children foods not cleared by the household healer, keeping them awake past hours she claimed damaged their health. Filling their heads, she said, with a common girl's affections that would only make the coming transition to proper guardianship more painful for them. It was, I understood immediately, both an attempt to have me removed before the deadline and a rehearsal for the very argument she intended to bring before the pack elders. Soren dismissed the report within the hour, publicly, in front of the same steward Freya had gone to, which I suspect told her exactly how much danger her scheme was now in. I did not sleep easily the nights that followed. I kept thinking of the particular stillness in Freya's face the day she first warned me off, and understood, with a growing unease I could not quite shake, that a woman who had spent a year patiently engineering another person's failure was unlikely to accept one dismissed report as the end of her efforts. Bronn doubled the watch on the nursery without being asked, and I noticed he had started tasting the twins' meals himself before they reached the tower, a small precaution that told me he shared my unease more than either of us said aloud. Her final move came 4 nights later. The same night I told you about at the very start of this. Someone slipped a dose of nightbell root. Bitter, slow-acting, easily mistaken for a common childhood fever if no one thought to look closer, into the twins' evening milk. Liv, smaller and quicker to react to poisons than her brother, began struggling to breathe within the hour. And it was pure instinct, drawn from years spent half listening to Hollis and the healers who passed through Wintermoor's kitchens, that had me reaching for charcoal paste before I had even fully understood what was happening. My hands had not stopped shaking since the moment I noticed Liv's breathing change, though I had not let the shaking slow them down. I had spent enough evenings half listening to the healers who passed through Wintermoor's kitchens over the years to recognize the particular laboured rasp of a poisoning rather than an ordinary fever, and I had reached for the charcoal tin on pure instinct. Praying I was remembering the dosage correctly, because there had been no time to send for anyone more qualified than myself. Freya arrived in that doorway accusing me of poisoning the very child I was actively saving. Loud enough for the whole wing to hear, timed precisely to land before anyone had a chance to see the truth for themselves. Soren reached us moments later, his wolf barely leashed beneath his skin, and took in the scene in a single sweeping look, Liv's breathing already easing under the paste, Fen clinging hard to my skirt rather than backing away from me, and Freya standing in the doorway with an accusation ready before she had even properly looked at her own niece. "She is helping her," Bronn said, arriving a step behind Soren, already crouched to check Liv's pulse himself. "The paste is working. Look at her colour." "Then someone poisoned that milk before she intervened," Soren said, his voice gone very quiet and very dangerous. "And I would like to know who had access to that nursery kitchen tonight, who was not already up here with the children. The healer summoned to confirm the poisoning found. Within the hour, a small paper twist of nightbell root, discarded in a servant's passage 1 floor below the nursery. A passage Freya's own maid was seen leaving not an hour before the milk was served. A detail 3 separate kitchen staff were willing to swear to once they understood what was actually at stake. Fen, still clinging to my skirt, looked up at his father and said, in the small, clear voice he had only recently found again, "She did not do it. Aunt Freya did." No one in that nursery had a story ready for a 3-year-old solving a poisoning before the adults finished arguing about it. Freya was stripped of her standing at Wintermoor that same night. The Regency law that had driven her scheme quietly struck from use by the pack elders once the full shape of her plan came before them, and she was escorted from the castle before dawn with considerably less dignity than she had worn walking its halls for the past year. Liv recovered fully within 2 days and refused, loudly, to drink milk from any cup that was not brought to her personally by me, which the healers agreed to humour for as long as she needed. Fen, for his part, refused to let me leave his sight at all for the better part of a week, trailing me through the kitchens and corridors with the same fierce, watchful vigilance he had once reserved only for strangers, now turned entirely toward keeping me safe instead. Soren found me in the nursery a week later, once the household had settled back into something resembling calm, holding the same chipped wooden spoon Liv had claimed as hers weeks before. I have spent 3 weeks trying to work out how to thank a woman who saved my children twice, once from grief and once from poison, without it sounding like I am simply trying to keep a very good nanny, he said. I do not think I have managed it gracefully. You do not need to manage it gracefully, I said. You simply need to say the true thing. He was quiet a moment. I loved my wife entirely, and losing her nearly ended whatever part of me was capable of loving anyone else again. I did not expect a kitchen girl with a wooden spoon to prove that part of me wrong. I am done being afraid that caring for you is a betrayal of caring for her. I think, somewhere, she would simply be glad her children are safe and warm and loved again, and I think she would like you considerably more than she would resent you. When he kissed me, careful and unhurried, like a man who had spent a year believing himself finished with this particular kind of feeling, I felt something in my own chest, some quiet ache I had not admitted to carrying since the first night Liv fell asleep against me, settle into something steadier. He claimed me before the full pack a month later, his hand sure on the old iron circlet as he set it on my head himself, with Fen and Liv seated at the very front of that hall, Liv clutching her wooden spoon like a sceptre of her own. It cost him some quiet grumbling among the older houses about a king marrying a kitchen girl barely 2 years past scrubbing his own pots, and he answered it the same way every time. That the woman who had gotten his children to sleep through the night, and then saved their lives besides, had already proven more fit to stand beside him than a lifetime of proper breeding ever could. Fen, asked by one particularly stubborn elder why the pack should accept a common kitchen girl as their queen, answered before his father could, with the flat, unimpeachable authority only a 3-year-old possesses. She is not common, he said. She is ours. No one in that hall found much room to argue with him. 6 months later, I stood in that same nursery with a letter from my own mother in one hand and the chipped wooden spoon, worn considerably smoother now from daily use, in the other. My mother's letter asked, carefully, whether it was true her daughter was Queen of Wintermoor now, raising the king's own heirs as if they were her own. I wrote back that it was true, and that the heirs in question had already informed me, with total confidence, that I had always been theirs, and simply taken a while to notice it. Bronn had stopped bracing every time Freya's name came up in court proceedings, mostly, now that she sat in exile, rather than the nursery doorway. Fen had started sleeping through entire nights, without once needing anyone beside him, though Liv still insisted, every evening, on one story, and one spoonful of porridge stirred by no hand but mine. And Wintermoor, Once a household so grief-worn it had driven away 5 careful, well-trained women in a single year, had quietly become known instead for the king, who had learnt to love again, loudly, in front of anyone watching. The old regency law that had nearly cost Soren his children was formally struck from Wintermore's books before the season turned, replaced with a simpler rule the pack elders agreed on unanimously, that no distant claim of blood would ever again outweigh the plain, daily evidence of who actually stayed. I like to think Isolde would have found that particular piece of justice fitting, even if she would have teased me mercilessly for how solemnly everyone delivered the announcement. I had also, in those 6 months, become the person new mothers in the household quietly sought out when their own children struggled to settle, which I had not expected and found I did not mind at all. There is a particular kind of trust that grows in a place once it has watched grief get handled honestly instead of hidden, and Wintermore, slowly, was becoming that kind of place. I stirred the porridge with my chipped, familiar spoon and thought about the kitchen girl who had carried a supper tray up a dark staircase 3 weeks into that grief, certain of nothing except that 2 children should not go hungry while the rest of the household argued about who was allowed to feed them. She had no idea, that ordinary tired night, that sitting down on a nursery floor and saying nothing at all was about to become the bravest thing she ever did. She only knew the crying needed to stop. I like to think she would be glad, now, that she never once thought to knock before walking in. Do you think Freya ever truly loved her sister's children at all? Or had she been planning this from the very night Isolde died? Tell me your theory in the comments. And if you want to stay in this nursery a little longer, comment the spoon and I will know exactly what you are asking for. Thank you for sitting on that nursery floor with me. Wherever you are listening from tonight, welcome to Wintermore. Follow along for the next story from this side of the border. There are more kings in these hills learning how to love again, loudly, because someone smaller than them refused to let them stay quiet. And I intend to tell you every one of their stories.